On the podcast today, we are going to dissect chapter 48 of the Tao Te Ching, which makes up the 48th episode of the 81 Meditations on the Tao Te Ching. And as usual, Guyang will read Jia Fu Feng and Jane English's translation, and I will read Derek Lin's translation.
In the pursuit of learning, something is acquired every day. In the pursuit of the Tao, every day something is relinquished. Less and less is done until non-action is achieved. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. The world is governed by letting things take their course. It cannot be governed through interference.
Pursue knowledge, daily gain. Pursue Tao, daily loss. Loss and more loss until one reaches unattached action. With unattached action, there is nothing one cannot do. Take the world by constantly applying non-interference. The one who interferes is not qualified to take the world. So we see a relationship here between chapter 47 and 48 in regards to wu wei, non-interference, all of these concepts, and also of the accumulative knowledge that we go through in life. So, and these are two of the better chapters within the entire Tao Te Ching.
I think those two chapters might be really the core message of the Tao Te Ching as well.
Definitely. Less is more. Don't seek more knowledge in a lot of sense. And we need to remember that Lao Tzu speaking about this in relation to Confucianism and during the Warring States period of China, because he saw the way a lot of people were trying to acquire more and more knowledge and acquire more and more rules and rituals and regulations and so forth and so on. And he saw this as obviously a pitfall, because people were going further and further away from the Tao. They kept forgetting the Tao, and Confucius was telling them that in following these rules and regulations, that's actually how you attain the Tao, you induce the Tao. And Lao Tzu was saying that's preposterous, because we're already innately one with the Tao.
Yes.
We are nature itself. And so we don't need to acquire more and more information.
From acquiring more and more information, it's externally can only make things more complicated, and in the end it warps our nature, so completely counterproductive. But in this chapter, Lao Tzu is trying to say is that Tao, the way of Tao is like unlearning in a sense. Less is more. Like you need to stop inquiring more knowledge, information, or even opinion. You need to stop accumulating those things internally. You need to empty it out. You need to unlearn all these things. So to be able to unlearn, to be able to start the unlearning process, first of all, you need to stop accumulating, right? Nowadays, especially as the internet is in our pocket and always look for information, news, different ideas on things, and if you have some question, you can always ask online, right? So as if more you know is better, or more you know is you look like a more knowledgeable person. But again, that's not true at all, actually. That is more, again, you go further away from your inner center.
Yes. And those companies and people who run those companies, social media companies particularly, don't understand Taoism and this concept at all, because they're trying to train people to seek more knowledge. They're trying to train people to fidget all the time. And so there's no time for space, right? People will play with their phone at any opportunity when there's a spare brief moment of time. Now, it wasn't so long ago, only 12, 13, 14 years ago, where that was not even a habit. We've watched footage of videos we've done back in 2010, for example. No one's holding a phone. People are just enjoying a tea and looking out at the mountains. You go to a coffee shop now, they're all engrossed in the phone. They wouldn't even know the mountains are there. And so this is a really bad habit that people are doing, because you're not allowing your mind space to even assimilate things that are important, because you're constantly feeding it full of garbage. And most of the crap on social media is just that. It's just crap.
That's right.
It's fast food. It's digital fast food. and you're affecting your nervous system, you're affecting your psychology. People are starting to actually think different these days, right? People are so confused with all of these ideas that proliferate through social media that they actually don't just understand the nature of themselves. I mean, if we could transport Lao Tzu from 500 BCE to 2,500 years later to now, I mean, he would just be dumbfounded with what's going on at the moment. So we have to really, especially if we're on a spiritual path, we have to be sincere with ourselves. How much do you play with your phone? How much do you fidget? How much do you try to fill your spare time with information and meaningless information, right? Like, so meaningful information might be getting a book and reading it, which is a long form of content. It's not short bites. It's not little hits. It's not a post on Facebook, for example. And so we have to be really sincere with ourselves. Are we carrying the phone around with us everywhere? Are we cleaning watching the phone? Are we taking a poop and watching the phone? Are we cooking and watching the phone? I mean, it's a really bad distraction.
Yes.
And people are being trained this way. That's why when information about Taoism and that comes into people's minds, it's hard for people to understand because they've never had the space in their life to not engage with a lot of things, right? So people in this day and age are always engaged in something. If it's engaged in their own mind, or they're engaged in some sort of social problem, or they're engaged in whatever they think they should be engaged in, where you don't need to know everything.
That's right.
You don't need to know everything. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. I like how you mentioned opinion because, you know, as the old adage says, opinions are like a-holes. Everyone has one and they all stink. So, and Lao Tzu, he would love that quote because there's nothing more true than that, right? Where when you're following the Taoist path, you're getting out of the idea of right and wrong, good and bad. And so if those things are beginning to fall away, this concept of right and wrong, good and bad, then you don't have an opinion, you don't have an agenda, and you're kind of moving with life as a piece of life. You're moving down the river as one with the river. And so we're not doing that in this day and age. Our opinions, our complaints, we're always overthinking about ourselves. This is a dam in the river. It blocks the fundamental forces of the universe to use you. And so these are the big problems that particularly younger generations are going to encounter.
And I think Zhuangzi understood this like a really big game of mind, play mind game that long ago. So he was really supporting the fasting the mind, right? Concept of fasting the mind. So with the social media and whatnot, you can just drop your phone, just leave it at home just for the one day in a week, like on a weekend maybe.
Yep.
Like, I mean, just have a spare time for yourself and just to leave the phone alone and just practice the fasting the mind for half day or something like that. Yeah. And when you actually come back and at the end of the day, when you actually look at the phone, you will realize how nothing really happened during that time. Yeah. So then you will understand that how much time that you actually waste on the phone. Yeah. You're just looking at mindless things. So it's actually, the world is going around as it should fine without our attention, really. Yeah. Yeah, so we need to really implement that kind of like a practice in our life to just to fast your mind and just to refresh your headspace a little bit and give that energy to something really important for yourself. Like you said, reading a book or do some really like artistic hobby or something like that. That'll slow down the thinking process, the speed of thinking, and that'll naturally benefit your daily life. And yeah, there's only good things.
Yep.
Yes.
And why? And not just one day too. Like, why just one day? You know, I mean, I know what you're saying.
To begin with.
To begin with, you know what I mean. Like, but it needs to be more than that. Yeah. Particularly if anyone listening and watching is really sincere about the spiritual path. The phone is a distraction. And what I find tragic is, and this is on a lot of our podcasts, and I've made many videos, that we're even talking about the phone. is a tragedy, right? Because this digital thing is a distraction and an obstacle on the spiritual path for people, and obviously it's detrimental to people's mental health and everything, with suicides and everything going up since the social media on the phone. It's such a tragedy, but because we're talking about this as one of the main obstacles, so we can't even go deeper beneath the phone. So we can't talk about vasanas and samskaras because there's this distraction that people just are distracted with, and for whatever reason want to see what other people are up to all the time, and want to have put their 2 cents on the table with an opinion or their own personal agenda. But if you're on the spiritual path, you should be using the phone less. I mean, it's just a fact. It's a fact. And you should be reverting probably to using a laptop and having dedicated time to where you can look at the things that interest you. And
that's right.
If it's a documentary or maybe our podcast, you want to sit down and listen. And look, I know everyone's circumstances are different, so not everyone has a laptop, right? But we can't use that as a cop-out on the spiritual path. Too many people defend technology this day and age. I find it odd when people start defending AI and social media. Imagine if I was defending my vacuum cleaner. Because to me, the vacuum cleaner is very useful. And if people start saying bad things about the vacuum cleaner, like, why don't you just go back to the broom and this and that? I love that vacuum cleaner.
Feel very offensive.
I feel offended,
Offended,
Yeah. In this day and age, everyone's eager to be offended, right? That's the new mentality that social media has trained people, to be eager to be offended. Obviously, I would be indifferent. If someone was criticizing my vacuum cleaner, I'd say, I see your point, actually. Broom is pretty good, But everyone's like defending technology as if they're like defending God. It's their new religion. And on the spiritual path, if that's part of your mentality, then you need to recalibrate and reorient your awareness within yourself and spend a long time off of all technology.
Yeah, exactly. It became, the science and technology became another new religion nowadays. And
It is, yeah.
Which is, very tragic in a sense that it has to be spoken about and also have to be warned to people.
Yep.
Yes. So in this chapter, and I think another point that Lao Tzu trying to make is that when he talks about to acquire knowledge, you need to get new information every day. And Lao Tzu is saying, stop doing that. Don't do that. You need to practice unlearning, right? That is because the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth is actually beyond words. So in a sense that this knowledge, information, and all these things are actually, sound funny enough, is fundamentally wrong because the ultimate truth is beyond words. So it cannot be explained by any kind of knowledge or any kind of information. So they are all fundamentally wrong. So it actually completely irrelevant with the ultimate truth.
Yeah. Because philosophy, words, language, everything is always a representation of what we're talking about. So especially when we're talking about the ultimate reality, right? Like, we can discuss it and we need to discuss it. That's what's important. Even Lao Tzu did discuss it. But he was never fooled into thinking that the words themselves in any way stand as a complete representation of what he was trying to discuss. That's why he said he didn't know what this ultimate energy is. He just calls it Tao. He used just Tao as as a word to represent. He didn't come up with any elaborate word. It was just, in Chinese, that's what it was. It's just Tao. It's just, it's this path, this irreducible essence that we become cognizant of when we begin to simplify our life and become humble and follow the low path. We unlock this fundamental energy force that moves through us, right? So, and a lot of people get so stuck on the words, get so stuck on the symbols as well as representations, as people attach to them actually as, this is why in some religions, idolatry is deemed a negative thing. Idolatry doesn't have to be a negative thing, obviously. It's only negative when you confuse the image with the actuality of it, right? Like, all of these symbols and words that we use and this and that are just metaphors for the transcendent, They should be thought of in that way.
That's right.
They're metaphors for the transcendent, but you shouldn't mistaken the map for the territory, to use that analogy, right? So we're constantly always confusing the map with the territory. And also, to get back to what you were saying with unlearning, in the Warring States period of China, in Chinese, this is also targeted at Confucianism as well, at the Confucian philosophy that people were following. Like Lao Tzu is saying that people need to unlearn what Confucius is teaching, because that doesn't induce the Tao at all. It's when you unlearn all of these rites and rituals and Confucius's philosophy in general, that's when you start to actually open your mind and you get access to the fundamental forces of nature moving through you. So it's very important that we go through this process of unlearning.
Yes. So I mentioned that even idolatry, the concept of God, image of God, that itself is only has to be understood as simply just a representation of the ultimate.
That's right.
Instead of taking the as a literal sense, right? Then you get attached to it. Then you have again the idea of you become very violent or against the other religions, right? That's what it can become violent in some sense. Yeah.
You need to understand idolatry in the purest sense. I mean, idolatry in some sense has been framed by other religions as sort of a negative word, right? And actually, it's probably not the correct word, particularly when we talk about, if we look at the Tai Chi symbol in Taoism, or if we look at images of Brahman with Om, Shiva, Vishnu, all of these things, right? We're talking about the transcendent. And the reason why other religions would have probably a negative stance on that is because they probably think that their God is the only God. And so that you're creating images and it's sacrilege, right? But again, these are used as tools to understand the transcendent. And actually it's a beautiful thing, right? If you've got images of Shiva and Vishnu and you've got the big Tai Chi symbol, yin and yang, around, it builds a good energy in your house. But one is using those as a tool or to facilitate a type of atmosphere that is conducive for spiritual growth, right? But if you're a fundamentalist and you look at these as a negative thing, then that's where problems arise.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be like that. You and I spend most of our time in India, and there's images of Brahman everywhere, right? And it's a beautiful thing. It builds an energy. What a lot of people who are fundamentalists in the opposite direction, or just atheists in general, they want life to be about just plain white bread with no butter.
Yeah.
So we just have concrete buildings like this. We all work for the dollar. There's no flavor and culture at all. We take all the flavor out, and all we're left with is white bread. So enjoy. It's not toasted either, just plain.
It's going to be pretty dry.
Dry. Roll it up like a ball, and So that has to be understood in its right context, right? So a lot of people, because they have a negative orientation and they don't understand the kind of divine expression of Brahman or Tao, people have a negative perspective of images, for example, right? But if we look at the Sri Yantra, if we look at symbols like that, or the Om, these symbols that are geometrically sound, and the yin yang and this and that, these things came from somewhere deep within individuals to express that ultimate reality.
Yes. They are there to remind us only. That's why they're just symbol of the divinity.
That's right.
Really.
Lao Tzu wouldn't make the mistake, right, if we looked at the gamut of Wu Chi with the void symbol, and then Tai Chi with the yin yang, and then the Bagua with the 8 trigrams to express the 5 elements, the 5 phases of life in Taoism. That's a science in and of itself, a spiritual science. But obviously he knows that, for example, the circle for the Wu Chi, the void circle with the Wu Chi, he understands that is just the best artistic representation that we have of that ultimate Tao of stillness, right? Like, which is identical with Nirguna Brahman.
Yes.
In Sanatana Dharma, Nirguna Brahman is Brahman without qualities. So with qualities, Saguna Brahman is the 10,000 things of nature we have around us. And so he's not too concerned about that. He just understands that that's the best artistic representation that there is. It's either that or you just got a blank white piece of paper.
Yes.
You know, so to put something on there, you know, just draw a circle, and then
Yes.
obviously as you go down the gamut, you get, you know, the yin yang, and you have the Bhagwan and all of that. But I don't think people need to be too stuck on that. And I think that because what you and I are saying is you don't want to take the unlearning aspect too far, or you don't want to become a non-dualist cop about, you know, like you don't want to start condemning idolatry or thinking people are beneath you because you've risen above all of this, because you've unlearned everything, but then you're attached to your unlearning. It's not natural, right?
Yes.
So when you begin to go through this process of unlearning, this is where you go through this process of unattachment. So you're not attached to things in your life. You're not attached to the person you've become.
Yes.
You've let go of all of what defines you, the cumulative knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's what the great unlearning is, right? The great unlearning is the cumulative knowledge that you think is who you are. Jason is like this, he's born here, he looks like this, he apparently thinks like this, so forth and so on.
Yes.
But this is the unlearning process. It doesn't matter what's going on in the external world. I mean, it means nothing to an individual actualizing the potential of the Tao. You need to go through this unlearning.
Yes.
And so that's when you detach from a lot of the things that you've been too attached about. And, you know, the main thing that we are attached to is our sense of ego.
Yes, that identity.
The
isn't
identity.
it? That's that great unlearning process, isn't it? Like, yeah, the information, knowledge, yes, of course, it's all part of it. But that we can, let's say, okay, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to block new information. I'm not going to, you know, search for it anymore. But what's more difficult is to unlearn yourself.
Yep.
Like, how can you unlearn yourself? You know?
Exactly.
It's your sense of identity that you've accumulated from socialization.
That's right. And I like what you mentioned about being paranoid about accumulating any more information in relation to what we're saying, right, with the great unlearning of unlearning the identity, the ego, the jiva, to use Sanskrit, is that if you were unlearning yourself, right, what would happen to the information that you accumulate?
Doesn't have any power.
Doesn't have any power, doesn't stick. It only sticks when there's an identity. You see? So the information goes through you like the wind.
It only has meaning when you really believe in it.
Yes.
And the belief is coming from having identity.
That's right. So if you don't have any belief in your own identity, if the identity has been cleansed out of yourself to leave you as the pure expression of the Tao, it doesn't matter what information comes into you. You will use it immediately and appropriately if it's useful, but it still won't have a binding factor for you. It won't stick within you. It'll move through you like the wind.
So, like, you are practicing non-attachment just without trying to.
Without trying to, yeah.
It doesn't stick to you.
It doesn't stick to you.
Yeah.
And this is, again, where the path of Wu-Wei comes in. And practices like Vairagya, dispassion to worldliness and non-reactiveness, helps facilitate the diminishing influence your identity has on you, that accumulative identity, sense of self, ego that you have.
Yeah, you don't feed it anymore.
You don't feed it. You've said, you've made a proclamation. Your ego might have even made this proclamation. I'm going to follow Wu-Wei from now on. I'm just going to allow life to be as it will. And I'm going to let people live their own lives. I'm not even going to interfere. I'm not going to have an input here. And you know what this does to the ego? This is the worst possible medicine for the ego, because the ego will see things in life and it's like, oh, I know that I want to have a say. I want to throw my 2 cents in. But didn't you make that proclamation? It's like, oh, I did.
You need to bite your tongue.
Need to bite your tongue. And all this does is it starves the ego of oxygen. It suffocates it. And then all that's left as you continue this process is this sparkling diamond lotus that you are, right? This, to use Buddhist analogy, like this crystal clear mirror of reality, where you don't have the images aren't stuck in the mirror anymore. You're not convinced that these images in your mirror are who you are. You've just let them just come and go.
Yes.
The mirror is perfectly clean. The images may come and go, but you know that that's not who you truly are. And that's the important practice with the great unlearning, is following that wu-wei, following like they mention in this chapter, right, about following the path of non-interference.
Yes.
And that's not just a perfect remedy for a king, but it's a perfect remedy for all of us.
Yes.
And the irony is that if a king practices that, if he practices non-interference, that's how the people begin to trust. But if he's always interfering within their personal affairs and the social dynamic, people begin to go, something not quite right here. And likewise with us, right, with our friends and family around us. If you're one of those people who was always interfering with other people's lives, people, they get the proverbial shits with people like that, and they don't want to even hang around those type of people anymore.
Yes.
And so that's what we need to practice. We need to make that proclamation, actually. We need to understand the benefits of just allowing life to be as it will.
That once that practice becomes part of yourself, then you will experience real sense of freedom, actually, because no information, and some kind of new ideas can really have power over you, really, because it doesn't stick to you anymore, and you have no interest to them anymore. So it doesn't control you anymore, in a sense. It controls your mind, right? Because that's what we always exposed to. So that takes up all of your headspace, and sometimes you keep thinking about those topics of news and whatnot. It takes a lot of energy out of you. But once you clean out your sense of the ego, the identity, and you practice vairagya, stop reacting to those things, and at the end of the day, you'll find yourself how free it is to be that way, because it doesn't really have any power over you. You are completely free from everything.
That's right. And those things could happen. And because you've been practicing and because you've loosened your grip on your ego, you don't have even a natural reaction to it anymore, because that influential power has been downgraded.
That's right.
Downregulated, actually. And so we have to think about our lives and wu-wei in the perspective, like the Taoist principle, they always use the heart as an analogy. Your heart is beating now. Are you doing it? No one's doing it. It's just rolling on. That is the nature of existence. But because we let the accumulative sense of self, the ego, the socialization process we've all been indoctrinated with and endured, and our conditioning, we think that has some sort of influence over the beating heart of the universe I'm talking about here. The rivers still run, the moon is still there, the sky is unvarying in its movements, the sun comes up every day. We don't think about these things, right, in a more intuitive sense. This is just the way it is. And then we just go about our life and we do our best with what we have, and it's like, that's a terrible way of thinking about it. Because you're coming from a real negative perspective too. Like and this is what individualism does to the world, right? This is what Western individualism is doing also in the East, is that you build this perspective of it's you against the world. So you don't feel like you're part of the world. The world is something to conquer.
Yes.
And the opinions of other people are something to conquer, and so forth and so on. We can go further and further down the line. And this is a terrible way to think about life. Where Lao Tzu's saying, you already belong, man. You're innately good. What's your complaint about? What's your gripe?
People overvalue and over credit to what's happening outside and what outside source of information says to you, and we all let them dictate our life, right? And we give too much power to that. And when we talk about Wu Wei and Li, the organic pattern of the universe, which is without and within, and this kind of philosophy, and the people discredit this knowledge. But what's scientifically, I mean, as in Yuga, which is a Hindu system of the cycle of time, is based on speed of our heartbeat. And the Yuga system is coincide with the age of the earth and the universe.
Yep.
So who is to discredit that, in a sense, the real science?
Yeah, exactly.
The internal science, which is without and within, with the microcosm and macrocosm are the same and identical, actually. Because our heartbeat is coincide with the speed of universe, speed of how they measure the age of the earth and the universe. Then what's there to not believe and not credit that knowledge?
That's right. That's right. And I think we live in a day and age where people are trying to negate that type of knowledge, trying to circumvent it, where people are even denying the natural order of the world.
Yes.
You know, like you said, like from the heartbeat to the age of the earth to the cycles of the universe, etc. Right? There's this synchronicity, symbiosis between the microcosm and macrocosm.
There's a most direct connection.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
There's the big picture and the small picture of the same picture.
Yes.
And we live in a day and age, unfortunately, where people don't want to accept that. They actually feel uncomfortable with that reality. I don't want to accept it. Well, you'll go mad in not trying to accept it. Like, that's the height of arrogance to not accept it. Like, this is how psychopaths are born. Because psychopaths don't accept their reality.
And that kind of thinking is almost like ignoring your own existence as a divine being, in a sense.
Of course.
They were that corrupted and polluted by outside influence. That's the result of it.
This is what happens when you create a world that's godless, that's Taoist. You create a materialistic world where it's all based on whatever someone thinks. It doesn't have to be proven. It can even circumvent the natural order of the world in their perspective, obviously. But it doesn't. And that's where we are at as a species at the minute. Like, that didn't exist actually in Lao Tzu's time. Like, people actually still understood that there is, you know, a relationship,
Of course.
between us and the greater cosmos, and we have to accept the way we are as we are.
Yes.
But we live in a world now where you don't have to accept how you are. For some reason, nature was wrong. That's the world we live in now, right? Nature was wrong. It's like, well, that's the height not only of stupidity, but that's the beginning of the decline of the species.
Yeah, it's going over to psychotic level.
Exactly.
So, yeah, decline of species. Yes.
And that's, unfortunately, a lot of companies and social media and that, they promote that type of psychotic thinking. Whereas just authenticity and the genuineness of Taoism is something that's old hat. It's something that's non-existent.
It's in the past.
It just changed overall.
Yeah,
Since social media started, nature and everything, I see.
Seasons change every year, and still the trees growing and vegetables growing, but still it's in the past.
It's in the past. Oh, I see. Maybe I was wrong all along. Just because a few people said so, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So, but as any sane person understands, you have to accept your plight in life. You have to accept where you're at. And look, we all go through tragic circumstances sometimes. Sometimes people go through less tragic circumstances. But it's not to play the victim. It's not to complain. It's about accepting where you're at and accepting the fundamental forces of the universe moving through. Once you begin to simplify your life and you stop complexifying your life, you'll begin to align with those fundamental forces. And as we were mentioning, following the path of Wu Wei, Vairagya, these are the ways to go through that great process of unlearning. We live in a world now where the unlearning, that great unlearning, is shunned because people think, no, that doesn't sound right. We live in a world of identity politics, of individualism, so forth and so on. These are the new religions, right?
Yeah.
And if you step out of line with those, then you're cancelled and so forth and so on. And look, if you're a sane person, there's nothing wrong with being cancelled. There's nothing wrong with any of that. I mean, because who cares what someone thinks? You know what I mean? You can never sell your soul to something that is completely soulless.
Yeah.
And so this chapter is about following that path of Wu-Wei, coming back into the heart of existence,
Yes.
understanding that you are the pure reflection of the ultimate.
Yeah.
Not you as a person, you without the I. And it's mainly about that great unlearning that we all have to go through to understand the ultimate nature of Tao.
Yes. In that way, we can only be liberated.
That's true.
Completely free.
Yes. Guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.